Jeff Brohm was introduced as the new head football coach at the University of Louisville on Thursday afternoon. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to react to his press conference. We'll also talk about 2023 football recruiting and more. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. As always, I want to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. On Thursday afternoon, one of the two, Jeff Brohm was introduced as the new head football coach at the University of Louisville. We're going to talk about the takeaways and react to the introductory press conference. We'll also talk about Brohm and the 2023 recruiting class, and then we will conclude the show by diving into the weekly mailbag. So, as I mentioned, Thursday, the athletic administration met, the board of trustees met, and the contract was approved for Jeff Brohm to be the next head football coach at the University of Louisville. I thought that the press conference would be on Friday. Obviously, I was incorrect. It was late on Thursday. There was a lot of people at Cardinal Stadium to witness Jeff Brohm being introduced, and it seemed like a very fun atmosphere. To be completely honest and straightforward, there's not much you can truly take away from an introductory press conference. Obviously, you want to be excited. So you try to convince yourselves, if you're not already excited, which obviously with Jeff Brohm being the new head coach, there's no need to try to convince yourself because it's very obvious that this fan base has been rejuvenated. There have been reports that season ticket sales have gone through the roof. The ticket office has had quite the busy past couple days. So that just leads to show you that it's going to be a very, very fun fall for the fan base, assuming that the Cardinals look good on the field. Now, granted, also, it's all about winning games. It's a feel-good story. Jeff Brohm finally being brought home. It's a feel-good story. It has the opportunity, to be a very, very successful tenure here at the University of Louisville for Jeff Brohm. But, he even mentioned it as nice as this was from a sentimental aspect. It's all about winning games, and it's great to be back in Louisville, but his main focus is winning games. Josh Hurd even said this, hey, look, we didn't hire Jeff Brohm because he's from Louisville. We hired him because we think that he is the best option out there for us to have gone out and gotten. The main takeaway from this press conference for me was that Jeff Brohm just gets it. He understands it. He is exactly what the University of Louisville fan base has been looking for. And one of the main gripes for Scott Satterfield was that the fan base didn't necessarily feel like Satterfield understood, what this program was looking for, as it pertains to the rivalry with Kentucky, so on and so forth. But it doesn't seem to be like it's going to be the case for Jeff Brohm. And like I mentioned on yesterday's show, this hire is exactly what this university needed. It's what this community needed to unite, I should say, to get back into the stands, to increase that fan support. Look, Louisville football fans have been just looking for some inspiration over the past couple of years. Obviously, the recruiting of the 2023 class started to increase that inspiration, but not a lot of people were sold on Scott Satterfield. But Jeff Brohm is a different story. I think that there were some hard feelings after 2018, and we'll talk about that here in just a second, when Jeff Brohm declined the University of Louisville, is that a lot of people still wanted Jeff Brohm after that. There was an opportunity last year where it seemed like Satterfield might be getting let go, and obviously Brohm was possibly waiting in the wings, but that didn't end up coming to fruition. This year, when Satterfield left, it seemed like, the writing was on the wall. The option was clear, and credit to Josh Hurd and company for getting this move done quickly and not wasting any time. So, hats off to the athletics department and office. So, but from a just an overall vibes check, I guess you could say, the vibes were pretty solid. It was an exciting press conference, inspirational. It just felt right. It felt like the right move. As I mentioned, Jeff Brohm gets it. As a guy who grew up being a fan of the University of Louisville, growing up in the city, playing at Louisville, coaching at Louisville early on in his career. He understands the expectations for this program. He understands the expectations from the fan base. He knows the level in which the University of Louisville should be at and where he wants to take this program, so on and so forth. So I think that that's one thing that fans definitely relished at on Thursday, is just hearing it verbally. Obviously, we kind of knew it, but listening to Jeff Brohm at the podium say, look, I understand everything about this job. It was the right timing. I will say I was upset in 2018, as most fans were, when he decided to stay at Purdue. On the podium, he explained that he felt as if he had an obligation to, stay and fill some of the promises and things that he said he would accomplish at Purdue. Said he wouldn't be able to look in the mirror at himself had he let that go. So as much as I didn't like it at the time, I respect him for being true to that and seeing that process through. He said he feels like after year 6 at Purdue that the program is in a good spot. He's in a good spot to take a new challenge, and I'm very, very excited to see where he can take this program. A very interesting note that he made, and it just kind of goes to show you just how unexpected this move was. He was explaining how he figured out that the job was open. He took his son to school Monday morning and was about to pack to leave to go out of town, and his son texted him to look at Twitter. And he did, and that's how he found out about Scott Satterfield leaving for Cincinnati, just like pretty much all of us. So I think that just kind of reiterates just how overall wild and unexpected that move was, how it was a move seemingly came out of left field, out of nowhere. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. The questions asked, I wish there were some more questions about the transfer portal and possible staff members for his coaching staff. But, I have no problem with the questions that were asked. Michael McCammon of Cardinal Authority 24/7 Sports asked about the 2023 recruiting class. He mentioned that he was going to be getting on the road here shortly. He had already been talking to some commits, guys that weren't committed, guys that were committed. Obviously, the race to signing day is going to be a very jam-packed journey over the next couple weeks. So, he mentioned offensively that it's going to be a very fun offense that scores a lot of points, that moves the ball around, that runs occasionally when it needs to. A lot of people took that as a possibly a playful jab at Scott Satterfield. Obviously, no confirmation on that, but that's how a lot of people took it. But it was just from a vibes perspective, everything you would hope for from the press conference. Obviously, not much that you can take away from it in terms of substance and, different things that you probably wouldn't have known. It just kind of reiterated that it seems like the future for Louisville football is very exciting, very promising. And obviously, it all starts with recruiting and the transfer portal. Speaking of recruiting, one of the main topics for Jeff Brohm's head coaching hire so far from the fan base is how is he going to keep this recruiting class intact? Well, we're going to break it down a little bit more here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting needs. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So moving right on along, discussing the 2023 recruiting class for the Louisville Cardinals. Obviously, just a week ago, seemingly looked like there was a chance that this could be the best recruiting class in school history. The coaching change makes things very challenging. I will say this for starters. It is almost unheard of for a coach to leave and another to come into the program and keep the whole recruiting class from the previous coaching staff. It's just not realistic. Even at the top of the food chain with, the top programs, that just doesn't happen. Maybe they retain a majority of the recruiting class, but there's going to be some decommitments. Unfortunately for Louisville, the possibility of getting the number one recruiting class in school history had to come during a coaching change. And, seemingly these changes never come at an ideal time for recruiting. You do have a couple weeks before signing day, so where you can try to start to build a relationship with the current commitments and guys that were already considering the school. But look, I don't think that the sky is falling if I was going to say if Scott Satterfield, if Jeff Brohm weren't able to keep the majority of Flyville 23, because you're trusting. If you're a recruit, you're trusting a coaching staff that you might not necessarily know much about. Now, granted, I know that the perception was that a lot of these recruits didn't commit due to Scott Satterfield, but more so based upon the school, NIL, Adidas, so on and so forth. We're going to see just how realistic that is. Obviously, 2 decommitments have already happened in number one running back Rueben Owens and 3-star safety Jaden Davis out of Suwanee, Georgia. Sorry, my nose has been itching for the past 3 minutes. I don't really know why, but oh well. Back on track. Obviously, losing Rueben Owens, it sucks. There's no other way to put it. He's dynamic. I think that he is one of the most impressive high school running backs that I have seen over the past decade. He's going to be very, very successful at Texas A&M. Jaden Davis was a solid defensive back prospect from Georgia, already been offered by Cincinnati. He could definitely be a option to follow Scott Satterfield to Cincinnati. Brian Brown also up there as well. Derek Nicholson. And I'm not sure if Greg Gasparotto has followed Satterfield or if he's staying. I know that there's still some coaching news. So we'll just have to see how that works out. But overall, that's tough to see. But so far, Louisville still has 12 commitments in the class. I think that for Jeff Brohm, the blueprint of success is going to be trying to hold on to the majority of the current commitments and look to try to get some of the guys he had committed at Purdue. And then maybe a guy or two that wasn't committed at all. Obviously, the big news, Jeff Brohm will be in California this weekend to watch St. John Bosco in the championship game and get to talk with Stephen Pierce Clarkson, the California recruits as well. It seems like at this moment, obviously, if Pierce Clarkson stays, you feel good about the other California recruits, but that is going to be the main focus. There's 2 things to focus on here. Number one, that is if Pierce Clarkson and company are okay with Jeff Brohm as the hire, and Jeff Brohm is okay with taking commitments from Pierce Clarkson and company. Very highly rated prospects, so you would assume that he would, and vice versa. With a very unique and innovative offense, you would have to think that the guys in this class, Pierce Clarkson and company, would be ecstatic. DeAndre Moore, so on and so forth. But who knows? Obviously, this weekend will be a telltale sign. It's going to be interesting leading up to signing day. I think that you can't treat social media as gospel, but Madden Sanker, Luke Burgess, and William Fowles all seem to be solid in their commitments so far. So we'll see if they continue to stick with their commitments. Raekwon Adkins, Kataris Hicks, Stanquan Clark, the three um, prospects from the South Florida area. I know that there was news that Stanquan Clark has been pursued by Miami, so there's that possibility of him flipping. And then there's no telling if Adkins or Hicks decide to stay in the class. Adonijah Green has a solid relationship with Scott Satterfield. It seems the four-star defensive lineman from Georgia. That's going to be another important prospect for Jeff Brohm. In terms of the guys that are currently committed to Purdue, Purdue did have some decommitments recently. Looking to find Terrell Washington, a top 1,000 running back from Wiley, Texas, decommitted in actually today. Also, Kewan Brown from the Atlanta area, top 700 running back, decommitted today or yesterday, I should say. You look at who they have committed. They have one four-star committed, Kendrick Gilbert, the defensive lineman from Cathedral High School in Indianapolis, posted a picture in a Louisville jersey today. Micah Carter from St. X, right in Louisville's backyard. Sadiq Clements, Drake Carlson, Will Height. There's a solid amount of, actually, I think that's Will Helt. The top 5 commitments for Purdue are all defensive linemen, so that's an area of focus. And not to mention, the transfer portal helps out because immediate eligibility transfer portal era, for a first-year head coach, it makes things tricky to have a lot of success in the first couple of years because of how recruiting can work for a first-time head coach trying to keep a recruiting class together. If a player were to transfer, he'd have to sit out. But with immediate eligibility, rebuilds can get sped up very quickly. There's a chance for Louisville, with a good amount of scholarships left, to address the needs for next year. Go get a transfer portal quarterback for Pierce Clarkson to learn under. You have the opportunity to go get starter caliber level players in the portal, getting depth pieces as well, and then continuing to focus on the recruiting class. Because let's face it, even if the California guys decommit, if they're not able to hold on to the majority of the current Flyville 23 commits, if they're not able to flip other Purdue commits, and the recruiting class is a pretty small class in numbers, that just gives you more scholarship availability for the transfer portal to go after players that are at Purdue. There's some Louisville natives that are in the portal, like Aiden Robbins, running back from UNLV, Stephon Heron, defensive lineman from Stanford, so on and so forth. So you have that opportunity to possibly bring some local guys back to the city, back to this team. You have the opportunity to just go out and get very, very competitive for next year. I'm not saying that you have to win 10 games right off the bat year one, but with a schedule that's pretty favorable next season, with the open scholarships, they have some solid talent returning. Obviously, there still will be movement, guys that decide to decommit, to transfer out, so on and so forth. There was news that Ben Perry entered the portal. He's going to play in the bowl game and give the coaching staff a chance. That is extremely good news. But there have been some guys that have entered the portal. Rance Connor, Luke Kandra, so on and so forth. So if Louisville can hold on to some of their returning production, keep the majority of Flyville 23 together, get some of the Purdue guys to flip their commitments, and really hit the transfer portal hard. Don't look now, but Jeff Brohm could have the Cardinals in a better spot in 2023 than Satterfield had the Cardinals in 2022. Obviously, some things are going to happen, but we'll obviously see how that works out. Before the remainder of the show, we'll dive into the weekly mailbag. If you are listening to this show on various streaming services, you'll hear a couple of audio implemented advertisements. So just stay tuned following the break. If you are not, or if you're watching this on certain streaming services like YouTube, WHS 11 Plus, you're not going to hear those advertisements. So stay tuned. Sorry, y'all can't speak today, but heading into the final segment of the show, the weekly mailbag. One day left in the week. We'll dive into the mailbag. Programming wise, it's going to be all about recruiting, the transfer portal, the coaching staff next week. The first question I have pertains to this recruiting class. If Pierce Clarkson decides not to come to Louisville, do you see Louisville going from getting a one-year grad transfer to trying to get a quarterback with multiple years of eligibility left? I think it would be more likely of an option. I think that if Pierce Clarkson commits, or let me rephrase, if he stays committed and he signs his national letter of intent, the chances of going out and just getting a one-year grad transfer like Austin Cook from Western Kentucky, so on and so forth, are probably higher than if he were to decommit. Then maybe you still go with the one-year grad transfer, try to get a quarterback in the 2023 cycle, but there's not many left, especially of that highly rated caliber. So I would assume that if that's the case, maybe you then look to try to get a quarterback that has multiple years. So definitely, I think that that's a good question, and that's definitely something that could happen depending on what Pierce Clarkson does. With Rueben Owens decommitting in your priority list for positions of need, where does running back now stand? That is an extremely good question. You have Jawar Jordan and Maurice Turner right now, assuming that they don't enter the portal. I have been told through the grapevine that Jawar Jordan is excited by the hire of Jeff Brohm, so that is good news. Those two are very solid. I think Jordan is definitely a feature running back in the ACC, which is definitely something to look forward to. I still think that you need to add possibly 2 to 3 more guys in the running back room at that time. Maybe you look to bring Travion Cooley back. But in Brom's offense, there's not going to be as many carries as there were in Satterfield's offense, so we'll see. I think that, priority-wise, you're probably looking at top 5, probably number 5 in my opinion. So definitely rises up the priority board. With the schedule not as tough as it was this season, do you think that we could see Louisville have more success next year in the win-loss column? I'm going to actually look up the schedule for reference. I mentioned it a little bit here in the last segment, but yeah, I think that there is a solid chance. At 7-5, obviously you have to you've got to take care of business. You've got to keep some of this recruiting class together. You've got to fill the recruiting class out and do solid in the transfer portal. But the schedule does offer you the opportunity to have a solid 2023. 7 wins in the regular season this year. You look at who the Cardinals are playing. You don't have Clemson or Florida State this year. Your conference play, you have Georgia Tech in the opening game of the season with a new head coach for them as well. You have Boston College, Virginia, NC State, Duke, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Pittsburgh. So definitely a more favorable ACC slate. You have Kentucky, obviously. But your non-conference schedule, you have Murray State, you have Indiana, you have Notre Dame as well. So I think that Notre Dame and Kentucky are probably on paper the 2 hardest teams on the schedule right now. So it's going to be interesting. Another thing is Louisville does not have Wake Forest on the schedule for next year. So I think that you have an opportunity to put together a pretty solid 2023 slate. No North Carolina as well. So you're taking on some of the opposition that you haven't played in a while, like Georgia Tech. So I think that there's definitely a solid opportunity. The final question for the mailbag pertains to local recruiting. Do you think that with the perception that Jeff Brohm is going to lock the city down in terms of local recruiting? Do you think that will pertain to the transfer portal as well, immediately speaking? I think it will. I've been hearing some good things centered around Stephen Herron, and his possibility of coming to Louisville. The former Trinity state champion, 4-star defensive line prospect, was a very, very solid player for Stanford. Obviously, Stanford, David Shaw retired, and he entered the transfer portal. So I think that Louisville has a solid chance to definitely be in the mix for Stephen Herron. Aiden Robbins as well. This makes a lot of sense for Louisville with Aiden Robbins because you have 2 running backs on the team right now, and it makes a lot of sense. You bring Aiden Robbins back to the city. You start to continue to mend over. You start to mend over the relationships that were lost in the second Bobby Petrino stint and Scott Satterfield's team. So I'm very, very excited for local recruiting. Obviously, Selah Brown, Josh Minkins have already announced that they are returning to next year's team. That is very encouraging as well. So we'll see just how successful he's going to be right away. I think that this is definitely going to be put in place for future recruiting classes, but you're starting to see it already. Guys staying, hometown guys staying. Also, Stephen Herron, Aiden Robbins, 2 of the local guys that have entered the portal that Louisville could definitely get into the mix with, and there possibly could be some more as well. But as I mentioned, next week we're going to talk a lot about the portal, recruiting. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, so buckle up. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. We'll see you right back here on Monday. Everyone get out to the KFC Yum Center on Saturday. Cheer on Danny Busbum Kelly and the Louisville volleyball team as the Cardinals have a spot in the Final Four on the line as they take on the 3rd-seeded Oregon Ducks. 4 o'clock, first serve at the Yum Center. So get your tickets and support the Cardinals volleyball team. That's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here on Monday.